Hi everyone, this is Katie from Moonflower Moments. Today I would like to start a new playlist called Reading Table Reset, in which I go through the decks that I'm going to be using for that week or on a every other week basis and explain where I get the inspiration to use these decks from. So today my inspiration comes from this bouquet of flowers in front of me. This is something that I do often as I go outside and I pick wildflowers that are growing in my yard, and I assign decks to them and also spreads to them. So I'm going to be showing you today how to do that as well. Hi everyone. So the first flower that I want to discuss from my bouquet is the lyre leaf sage. So this is one of the first flowers that is in bloom in late winter and early spring. And to represent it, and the first thing that's on my reading table is Tarot of the Moon Garden. So from a superficial standpoint, I picked this deck to represent lyre leaf sage because it matches very well. So as you can see from the border color, it matches those purples as well. But from a deeper standpoint, when this flower is in bloom in late winter, early spring, everything in your garden is still in the planting stage. And so these lush, vibrant scenes, you're imagining that, you're dreaming of that, you're hoping that that's gonna happen. And so I think that this flower and this deck represent each other really well because they both represent the hope of spring and the lushness that's gonna come when spring develops into summer. So that's the first deck and the first flower that I had to show you. The next flower is one that I'm sure everyone, if you live where I am, know. So this is the white clover. I know that this is a simple flower, but like I said, most of my bouquets are made out of wildflowers because I try to value what's in front of me. And so the one thing that I have to share about wild clover is, of course, its healing properties. So wild clover is traditionally used to heal in many forms. I'm not an herbalist by trade, so I won't go through all the specifics, but I know that you can make tea with it, and that tea can have a variety of properties. So I wanted to pick a deck that was healing in nature as well. So I picked the Prophet Oracle. And this happens to be one of the most healing decks in my collection. Ultimately, I find the fact that these cards are based off of larger works of poetry to be really beautiful and symbolic. I think that this deck is easy to get a hold of because it's mass market. So just like white clover, there's that element too. But primarily, this deck touches on themes that are deeper than the everyday. And I think it's important to recognize that clover, while it represents the everyday, is also part of the legume family, and the legume family adds nitrogen to the soil. So it actually soil corrects. So if you have a property that has a lot of white clover on it, your soil is likely to be very healthy. And I find that when you use this deck, it could almost course correct the base of who you are and help you out through your healing process, or at least that's how it's worked for me. So that is the second deck that's on my reading table right now, and that was inspired by the white clover. So the next flower that's going to be in my bouquet is fleabane. I'm going to point it up to where you can see it, fleabane. And it's in the common daisy family. It's everywhere, especially during this time of the year. It's near ditches, it's near parks, it's near like little crevices in your yard. It pops up everywhere. And so for that reason, I decided to pair it with the Druidcraft. So fleabane was something that grew up on my father's property when I was getting older and I was growing up, and it's something that I used to play with a lot as a child. And Druidcraft was my third tarot deck. And so really it was the one that I learned from. And so I primarily picked this because this deck has a lot of nostalgia for me, just like fleabane does. It's easily accessible, just like fleabane is. And I think its message is nice and clear. And it's a very generic reader. So just like fleabane can feed butterflies, moths, multitude of insects, you always see insects on this one, the Druidcraft can be used for a variety of readings. So that's why I chose Druidcraft to match with fleabane. So the next flower that's in my bouquet is another type of clover. It's red clover. So this is our first year planting it, and I really love how lush it is. So when you see this in a field, you're blown away by how it moves with the wind. And it's just its rich red nature. So when I think about red clover, I rarely think about the flower as an individual unit, because really its beauty comes from the landscape. And so for that reason, I chose to represent this deck with Naturescapes. So Naturescapes is a beautiful, great deck. I think that it represents the overall energy of a situation when you read with it. Just like I think if you come across a field that has red clover on it, you're not really looking at the minute details. Instead, you're swept up into how the overall moment feels, how everything vibes with you, how the wind is blowing through the clover. And I think that that's the reason that I chose it, is because this flower definitely represents the bigger picture to me, and how the bigger picture can be incredibly moving. You don't always have to get caught up in with the details. So the next flower that I wanted to show, and this one's gonna be my last one, is the fire wheel. These are my favorite flowers. They were one of the first ones that I learned how to cultivate in my garden. So I'd show it to you that way, but it's gonna flop over. And I have two decks to show for this. So one of them I'm pulling out for a nostalgic reason similar to the deck I pulled out for Fleabane. And that would be this. So the Goddess Tarot reminds me of Fire Wheel a lot, primarily because of the colors. You can see that they match really well together. But as I had already said before, Fire Wheel was the first flower that I learned how to really read with. I'm sorry, garden with. Just like the Goddess Tarot was one of the first decks that I learned how to read with. This was my 4th tarot deck. And so when I'm looking for an RWS clone that just hits the spot, this is the one that I go to. When I'm looking for a plant in my garden that is gonna be sustainable, is going to fill almost every nook and cranny, I go ahead and grab the Fire Wheel. I also think it's really important that this is a generic reader. So the Goddess Tarot is what I consider to be one of my guide decks. I feel like I can go to it with any questions and all questions. Just like the Fire Wheel is, you oftentimes see butterflies eating off of this, but I've seen moths late at night eating off of it as well, specifically because the colors are so bright that I think at dusk it's still easier for them to see it. So just like this is a generic reader, the Fire Wheel is a generic feeder. And so I thought that they would go well together. The next deck that I want to show for Fire Wheel, it is my favorite flower, so I get to have 2 decks for it, is the Aztec Tarot. And many of the reasons that I had listed before for Goddess Tarot also fit this. So one is the colors. I think the colors together are just so striking. The next thing that I notice is that fire wheels tend to grow in environments that are prairie environments. They can also do really well in deserts. They don't like wet areas at all, so they like to have dry feet. And so for that reason, it reminds me of the desert that is depicted. So how do I use these in spreads? So I wanted to go ahead and show you how now that I've associated the decks with the spreads, how I go ahead and use them. So the first flower that I would call on for inspiration is the Lyre Leaf Sage. So I would pull out my deck that reminds me of the Lyre Leaf Sage, which would be Tarot of the Moon Garden. The next deck that I would want to call on would be the Prophet Oracle. So I'd pull out the flower that reminds me of that, which is the White Clover. Okay, and now that I have everything out, I would sit and I would consider how to build a spread with it. So I've already stated before that the Prophet Oracle primarily to me represents healing, and it especially represents like deep healing. So because legumes or clovers in particular grow such deep roots, it talks about healing and correcting the soil in a deep capacity. So this deck, I would ask it about healing at my core, okay? So I know that I'm going to use this deck in a way that deals with healing. So then I would look at this deck, which this represents the first comings of spring. What are the first things that are coming when you set your plan into motion? And so I would use this deck in particular to forecast what is going to come once I do that healing. So for example, this is what it would look like. So for the Prophet Oracle, it would be, what do I need to heal? So I'm just going to pull a card from that. So this is the life goes backwards, nor tarries with yesterday. So life doesn't go backwards, nor tarries with yesterday. So ultimately, what needs to be healed is some toxic nostalgia, I feel. And so in order to move forward, in order to get my spring garden to bloom, I need to take the time and need to take the opportunity to heal through whatever sort of toxic nostalgia there is. So the next thing that I would grab, like I had already said, is the moon garden, and this talks about what's going to come in that early spring. So I would ask myself, what is going to come from that healing journey? When I would pull Ace of Swords. So from that healing journey, I would get a sense of clarity. So when I'm able to move from the past and let go of that toxic nostalgia, I'll have a moment of clarity where everything seems bright, everything seems open. All of the flowers are standing at the attention. It's almost as if they've got hit with the first burst of sunlight. And so when I let go of the past, I'm going to walk into the future with new vision. And then if I really wanted to continue going with this, even if it's aesthetically it doesn't look good, just give me 1 second, I'm grabbing a flower back here. I could also pull in my beautiful little fire wheel. Now the fire wheel I already said I associate with the Aztec Tarot and also with the Goddess Tarot. So I would ask myself, okay, the fire wheel is clearly a flower that is in full bloom. It's clearly a flower that is at its brightest, most vibrant capacity. So I would ask myself, after I've done this work, after I've let go of the past, after I have gotten this clarity of vision, what is going to come to me from there? Oh, and look at that, the world. Beautiful. Beautiful. So now I've put my bouquet back together, and ultimately I keep this bouquet on my desk for about a week or two, depending on how long the flowers last. And if I build a very specific connection with any of the flowers, what I'll do is right before they start to fade, I put them in a book and I press them. And so that way I get to use them as stickers in my journals. So that way I carry on the symbolic nature of these flowers, not only with my reading practice, but also with my journaling practice as well. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you for making it through all the way to the end. And if this is something that you would like to see me do on a monthly basis, please go ahead and let me know, as it's something that I'm already doing regularly anyway. So thank you so much. I hope to see you next time.